Welcome to Partner Technical Services Product Release Training. The Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 Financial Management New Features General Ledger course will be presented by Senior Support Engineer Ryan Clevin and Senior Support Engineer Heath Weber. This course only covers new features, so knowledge of previous versions of Microsoft Dynamics AX is a prerequisite. This course was developed based on beta versions of Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, so there may be some slight differences in the released product. Now let me introduce Ryan Clevin.
Welcome to Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 Financials Management New Features, where we'll talk about Module 2, the General Ledger. My name is Ryan Clevin. I'm a Senior Support Engineer on the Dynamics AX application team. Module 1 of the General Ledger course will talk about the Financials Management New Features as it relates to the changes for financial dimensions in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. Lesson number 1, we'll talk about an overview of the financial dimension changes in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. This lesson will introduce the changes for financial dimensions in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009, financial dimensions worked independently or outside of the ledger account. So in the transaction entry windows, you'd have financial dimension fields which you track aside from your ledger account, which required, so if you had 3 dimensions that you were assigning to a ledger account, you'd track the 3 dimensions in 3 separate fields during transaction entry. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, the changes brought about in the organizational model help align financial dimensions more closely with the individual ledger account. Some of the key rationale for changes in Dynamics AX 2012 are financial dimensions in 2009 were limited to a maximum of 10 through your licensing key, which would needed to be set up through the financial dimension wizard. With Dynamics AX 2012, you can simply create a new financial dimension directly from a form without requiring that you go through a wizard that changes your entire database structure. The concept of financial dimensions, dimension sets, dimension set hierarchies, and dimension set rules from Microsoft AX 2009 was, I think, viewed as a source of confusion due to the way that the different forms were laid out and how they all align together. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, we're essentially following the changes for financial dimensions all through this new concept of an account structure, which we'll talk about in detail in this module. Also in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009, you could not use master record data automatically in financial dimensions. In AX 2012, you have the ability to map system-defined dimensions and create user-defined dimensions, both of which can be used and assigned to the account structure. The changes brought about with financial dimensions functionality in AX 2012 is accomplished through all of the following components, which we'll talk about in greater detail. Account structures, advanced rules in account structures, main account templates, shared chart of accounts, financial dimension focuses, ledger account alias, default accounts, default dimensions, segmented entry control, and upgrade considerations. Lesson 2, we'll talk about the creation of financial dimensions in AX 2012. This lesson introduces how to create both user-defined and system-defined dimensions in Dynamics AX 2012. In Dynamics AX 2009, everything from a dimension standpoint was viewed as a user-defined dimension, meaning you'd have your default department, cost center, and purpose, which came with AX, but then you'd use the wizard to create additional user-defined dimensions. For example, you could use the wizard to create a dimension called site. You could use the wizard to create a dimension called grants. You could use the wizard to create a dimension called location. So any additional level of detail for which you wanted to base a dimension off of, you'd have to use the financial dimension wizard for. In 2012, we allow you to create user-defined dimensions like you could in AX 2009, but we also allow you to create system-defined financial dimensions. So we'll talk about both of these types of financial dimensions in AX 2012. The first thing that we'll talk about is how to create user-defined financial dimensions. So I will go to General Ledger Setup, Financial Dimensions, to open the Financial Dimensions form. If I wanted to create a new user-defined financial dimensions, I'd simply click the New button. And in the use values from, if you're creating a user-defined dimension, you need to select custom dimension in the use value from field. Here I'll select a dimension name called location. Report column name just drives how that dimension is going to be stored on your reports. And you can map a dimension value mask. So I've just created a user-defined dimension. So that's essentially what you would have done through using the dimension wizard in AX 2009. I just created a new dimension. Instead of using the wizard, I performed that function just directly in this financial dimensions form. So the other concept is how to create a system-defined financial dimension. So in AX 2012, we allow you to create system-defined financial dimensions in addition to user-defined financial dimensions. The system-defined financial dimensions that are available for definition in AX 2012 involve bank accounts, business units, campaigns, customer groups, customers, departments, expense purposes, fixed asset groups, fixed assets, item groups, items, jobs, legal entities, positions, projects, prospects, resource groups, resources, value stream, vendor groups, vendors, and worker. So the scenario here is, if I wanted to create a system-defined financial dimension, I'd simply click the New button from the Financial Dimensions form, and I'd select the dimensional value that I want to create it off of. So for example, I might create a new system-defined dimension off of my items. That means that an item system-defined financial dimension will be created, and that financial dimension can be assigned to the account structure and available during transaction entry, just like a user-defined financial dimension would be. So for example, if I'm selecting a system-defined items financial dimension, if I click the financial dimension values, I'll actually see a list of all of my items. So you wouldn't have to create all of your item dimension values because they would be interpreted and read from your existing item master. So in this case, I actually already have one called items. So if we look at our other one that I have out there called items, click the financial dimension values button, we'll actually see all of the items from our item master. So you don't actually have to create financial dimension values for system-defined dimensions. Conversely, if we go back to the user-defined dimension that I created called location, to actually create a financial dimension value in AX 2012, I'd simply click the financial dimension values button to open the financial dimension values form, click the New button, give it a dimension value and dimension description. You can enter other information related to the financial dimension value, such as how a date range as far as when it can be active from an owner. This will actually go out and show your employees from human resources and so forth. So this is essentially how you create a financial dimension value for a user-defined dimension in AX 2012. Moving on to lesson 3, where we'll talk about account structures in Microsoft AX 2012. This lesson introduces the concept of account structures and how it relates to financial dimensions in AX 2012. So in AX 2009, the concept of financial dimensions was accomplished through creating dimensions, mapping them to financial dimension sets, assigning dimension set hierarchies to your dimension sets, using your structure designer, mapping a relationship for your dimension set hierarchy, then creating dimension set rules which you could tell AX to assign master data to use a specific dimension set hierarchy. In Dynamics AX 2012, we're essentially accomplishing all of that through a single form called the account structures form. So lesson 3 will talk about the concept of account structures. So I'll go to General Ledger, Setup, Chart of Accounts, and configure account structures. The The first core function that account structures serve in AX 2012 is to provide order of entry when you enter accounts during transaction entry. Now, in most cases, you'd want to define the main account as the first segment in your account structure, and then your financial dimensions you can map separately. So for example, if you wanted to create an account structure where main account is first, then department, then you'd list main account first and then department second. And then during transaction entry, when you're using a main account that is mapped to that account structure, then the account field in the transaction will recognize that there's two segments, and the main account should be first and the department should be second. The second function that it serves is to provide directions for how main accounts should have financial dimensions validated. So with the concept of account structures, you actually map main accounts to an account structure, and that's how AX knows how validation should be performed and whether or not you should be allowed to assign a department, a cost center, or a purpose, or any other financial dimension value that you have created. So the ledger account that you had from AX 2009 is now what we consider a main account. And the main account you have to map to an account structure, and the account structure that your main account is mapped to drives how financial dimension validation will be performed. So for example, in the sample data set here, I have a account structure called account structure P&L. And I can see in the account structure P&L that I have this set up to essentially be viewed as three segments. So in AX 2009, during transaction entry, you would have entered the ledger account, and we would have had separate fields for the department and the cost center. In AX 2012, all of these are essentially available in one account field during transaction entry, and it's separated essentially as segments. So you should almost view the financial dimensions as segments in your chart of accounts in AX 2012 based on how you have the account structure defined. So for example, for the account structure P&L account structure, I can see that I have all my main accounts ranging from 400,000 to 999,999, which from a sample data set standpoint is all my profit and loss accounts. So that means that any main account that I use during transaction entry that falls within this range, the system will recognize that that main account is assigned to this account structure, and it's going to realize that, okay, you should also be able to map a department or a cost center financial dimension in that account field. So you can actually make changes within the account structure. So if I wanted to make a change in the account structure, I would simply click the edit button, which changes the account structure to a draft format. I can click on an individual segment. So in this case, I'm clicking on the department segment financial dimension value, and right now it's set to all values are allowed. So if I say specify which values are allowed, I could say where department is between and includes operating unit 1 through operating unit 160. So what that means is that when I enter a main account that falls within this 4000 to 99999 range, the system will really realize that I could enter a department that falls within operating unit 1 and operating unit 160. So if a department doesn't fall within that range, then the system will not allow you to select that financial dimension during transaction entry. So for example, if I wanted to change the cost center segment, right now it's set to all values are allowed. But maybe I want to say this should be able to be used for operating unit 3566 through operating unit 3567. So I've made that change to my account structure. So right now, where it was previously saying any department can be used with any cost center when these main accounts are used, now I'm saying only departments OU1 through OU160 can be used for this main account range. And when those departments are used, only cost centers OU3566 to operating unit 3567 could be used. So that's the idea of the account structure in Dynamics AX 2012, and we can see how this is all going to end up relating to each other. So a main account should only be mapped to a single account structure. If we allowed you to map to a main account to more than one account structure, then AX wouldn't know which account structure to use to perform the financial dimension validation during transaction entry. So a main account you're mapping to a single account structure, and that account structure definition as far as how you have the segments defined for which financial dimension values can be used will drive how that main account gets validated during transaction entry. It's also important to note that you can actually create more than one criteria for each segment in your account structure. So for example, in this case I just have one, but I could say let's add a department node, and let's say I have, actually before we do this, let's go out and take a look at the financial dimensions that we have for departments. And I can see I have one called OU 2310 and OU 2311. So let's go in and actually make that change to our account structure. I'll click on the account structure that I was working with. And in this example, I'll say operating unit 2310 to operating unit 2311. So what I've done is I've created a second criteria in the department segment so that if 2310 or 2311 is used as a department, then the cost centers mapped to that node in the account structure will be used. So in this case, I'll just say when those departments are used, any values for the cost center field can be allowed, including blanks. So this allow blanks option was essentially accomplished through the structure designer in AX 2009 by adding a wildcard node, basically allowing a blank node. So in AX 2012, we have just a simple checkbox here that allows you to easily accomplish whether or not you want to allow blanks. So in this case, I've gone in and I've simply created an account structure that says if departments OU1 through OU60 are selected, then validate against these cost centers. If departments 2310 to 2311 are used, then validate against these cost centers, which I've set up here to be all cost centers. So this is the concept of the account structure. So what you're previously doing through dimension sets, dimension set hierarchies, the structure designer, dimension set rules in AX 2009 really is all funneled through this concept of an account structure in AX 2012. So now that I've made my change to the account structure, I can simply click the Activate button, and this will put the status of the account structure back to active. So anytime you want to make a change to the account structure, you simply come in and click the Edit button, make your change in the Configure Account Structures form, and then click the Activate button to reactivate. The next thing that we'll talk about is in Lesson 4, advanced rules for use in account structures in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. This lesson introduces the concept of advanced rules and how they relate to the account structure. Once you have defined the account structure, you can assign advanced rules within the account structure that allow you to define valid combinations at a more detailed level. You can create account rule structures that you can link to account rules. Advanced rules provide for additional dimensions outside of the account structure. You can create advanced rules that consist of one or more accounts rule structures. The advanced rule structure can only be used for the segments in the account structure that you have financial dimensions for. So in this lesson, we'll talk about a couple of scenarios here. We'll talk about some examples of how you could use advanced rules. We'll also talk about how to set up advanced rules for use with your account structures. So back in AX, I'm going to go to the Configure Account Structures form, and I'll just go back and actually select the account structure P&L that I had earlier taken a look at. So for an example, advanced rules allow you to define more detailed dimension combinations with the account structure. So if we look at our example of this account structure here, I have this map so that when these departments are used, then these cost centers can be used. When these departments are used, then these cost centers could be used. So at this point, I do not have any advanced rules set up. However, let's assume that when the OU 3566 cost center financial dimension value is selected, the user should also be selected to select a purpose financial dimension value. However, if the user selects the OU 3567 financial dimension value, then the user should not be allowed to select a purpose financial dimension value. So without the concept of advanced rules, you'd have to essentially multiply your account structures. So you'd have to set up many account structures to allow for any possible combinations of the financial dimension values to get to a detailed level. So advanced rules sit on top of an account structure that allow you to define at a more granular level what other financial dimensions could be used based on a certain select criteria. So that would be an example of how you could use an advanced rule. So if I wanted to say when OU 3566 is used, then I should be able to select a purpose financial dimension value. However, when OU 3567 cost center is used, I shouldn't be able to use a purpose financial dimension value. That would be an example of how you could create an advanced rule to accomplish that. So how to actually set up advanced rules for use within your account structure? There are two setup components involved. The first one involves the setup of an advanced rule structure. And the second piece of the setup is actually creating advanced rule that's assigned to your advanced rule structure, or that uses your advanced rule structure. So let's talk about each of those setup components. So I'm just going to minimize the configure account structures form. So if I go to General Ledger Setup, Chart of Accounts, Advanced Rule Structures, you can see that there's the sample data set here has a number of different advanced rule structures. For example, I have one called Purpose, all with blank. If I wanted to create a new advanced rule structure, I'd simply create new, assign a structure and a description, and then you'd click the Add Segment button, where you would create a new financial dimension or select an existing financial dimension to add as a segment to the account structure. So for in this example, I would maybe select Purpose, click the Add Segment button, and I could actually tell it which purpose financial dimension value should be allowed when I map that advanced rule. So all that you're doing here is you're creating an advanced rule structure which contains the financial dimension segments which you're going to extend as an additional segment per se in your account structure. So that's the first piece is for using advanced rules is to set up the advanced rule structure. So I'm going to go back to the configure account structures form. And once you've created a new account structure, you can actually, in the configure account structures form, you can actually set up the advanced rule now by simply clicking the advanced rule button from the setup area. If I wanted to create a new advanced rule, and in this case it's telling me that you cannot create an advanced rule unless the status of the structure is draft. So I'm going to change the status of it to draft, enter an advanced rule and a name. I can add a filter so that where cost center is OU 3566, use the appropriate advanced rule structure. So once you've created your filter criteria for your advanced rule, you map it to the advanced rule structure, and that's all there is to it. Once you've made the change, you can simply click the activate button, and the system will realize that that advanced rule is mapped to your account structure, so that when that cost center 3566 is used, a purpose financial dimension value, or however you set up the advanced rule, could be used as an additional segment when that cost center is used on a transaction. It's important to note that advanced rules are not a mandatory setup in AX 2012 for the use of dimension value financial dimensions. From an implementation standpoint, it probably makes sense to set up financial dimensions in a way where you only have a minimum amount of account structures. Then, once you've assigned that high-level account structure, you can use advanced rules to define the details of valid financial dimension combinations. If you do not use advanced rules, then that essentially means that you're going to have to set up many more account structures, which can make the implementation more difficult. As a general rule of thumb, makes sense to minimize the amount of account structures that you have assigned to a legal entity and use advanced rules to accomplish that more granular level of detail. Moving on to Lesson 5. The next thing that we'll talk about in Lesson 5 is the use of main account templates in Dynamics AX 2012. This lesson introduces the concept of how to use main account templates to create main accounts in AX 2012. The ledger account that existed in AX 2009 is really called the main account in AX 2012. So what we called a ledger account from prior, now we're calling a main account. When you entered transactions in AX 2009, you would have entered financial dimension information separately from the ledger account. In AX 2012, the financial dimension information has been added as a segment through your account structure. So as we notice in the configure account structures form, we're mapping those financial dimensions that are essentially going to be treated as a segment along with our main account. On page 28 and 29 of the Lesson 5 main account templates in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, we have a couple of good examples of showing a distinction of how that account and the financial dimension value would be selected differently across the two versions. So how to actually create a main account template in AX 2012. So I'm going to go to General Ledger, Setup, Chart of Accounts, Main Account Templates. So what you're doing with the main account template here is you're creating a template that has certain fields. You'll notice here that all these fields are fields that you're used to mapping to a ledger account in AX 2009. Well, these are fields that you'd map to a main account in AX 2012. But the idea is, let's say that for all balance sheet accounts, the main account type, of course, would be balance sheet. The close would be balance, and the currency validation rule would be optional, optional, and optional. Like this main account template is created. Well, that means that if I wanted to create a new main account, I could simply create a new main account, select this main account template called balance sheet, and then all the fields that have assigned to the main account template will be rolled down to the main account that we created. So some of the additional fields that we can map to the main account template here involve the main account, the name, the main account type, the account category, debit credit proposal, debit credit requirement, balance control, and so forth. So all these fields should look familiar based on the fields that you have available to assign against the ledger account in AX 2009. Well, these are fields that you can map to an account template. So in this, the sample data set has 4 different main account templates, one called balance sheet, one called expense, one called profit and loss. So how do we actually create a new main account that uses the main account template? So main accounts are set up via the chart of accounts form in AX 2012. So I'll go to General Ledger Setup, Chart of Accounts, Chart of Accounts. And I believe for the CEU company, I have the corporate main account shared chart of accounts assigned. So if I wanted to create a new main account, I could simply say new from template from the main accounts area. I could select my balance sheet, main account template. So for example, let's say I'm creating a new balance sheet account. Now you'll notice that the main account type, the category, the close, the consolidation account, and the validate currency code, validate posting, validate user fields actually roll down from the template. This is where I just create my new main account. And I can save, and I've just created a new main account using a template. So without the concept of main account templates, then it really would require that the user, when creating the main account, actually goes in and selects all of these fields manually with the addition of each new main account. So the main account template idea really allows you to be more efficient with the creation of new main accounts to your chart of accounts. Moving on to lesson 6. This lesson introduces the concept of financial dimension sets in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. So there's a key distinction between what is a financial dimension set from AX 2009 in comparison to what a financial dimension set is in Dynamics AX 2012. In AX 2009, a financial dimension set is a grouping of selected dimensions sorted with a specific priority. Those financial dimension sets then were mapped to a dimension set hierarchy, and the definition of the dimension set hierarchy drove how validation was performed. So The financial dimension set was really an important setup component from AX 2009. In AX 2012, we still have the concept of financial dimension sets. However, the concept of financial dimension sets is different in AX 2012. On page 35 and 36 of lesson 6 in the general ledger document, there's a chart there that talks about some key differences between how a financial dimension set is defined in AX 2009 versus how a financial dimension set is defined in AX 2012. So in AX 2009, it was used to group dimensions, and it was used to enforce validation through dimension set hierarchies. In AX 2012, they're used to group the main account and financial dimension segments into a focus, and then they're used to populate dimension balance information based on posted financial dimension transactions. So the key here is financial dimension sets in 2012 are essentially the financial dimension focus from AX 2012. So when you ran your certain financial reports in AX 2009, you would have selected a financial dimension focus. Well, in AX 2012, when you're running financial reports that include financial dimension values, you're going to actually select a financial dimension set. So let's go back into AX and take a look at how you actually create a financial dimension set in AX 2012. So I'll go to General Ledger, Setup, Financial Dimensions, and Financial Dimension Sets, which will open the Financial Dimension Sets form. You'll notice that this is going to look pretty similar to how you have financial dimension focus is defined in AX 2009. So for example, the department plus CC financial dimension set includes the custom department, custom cost center financial dimensions. So this is defined so that if I run a financial report and I select the department plus CC financial dimension set, then it's going to go out and look for balance data based on these financial dimensions that are assigned to the set that you created and selected for the report. Some other key components here of the financial dimension set in AX 2012 are the buttons. The key buttons at the top here are the initialize balances and the update balances. When you click the initialize balances button, AX 2012 will delete any existing financial dimension balances that exist for the financial dimension set and then recalculate the balances from scratch. So after an upgrade situation, and you've created financial dimension sets in AX 2012, the initialize balances button would be what populates that summary data for your financial dimension sets. The second button is the update balances button. So when you click the update balances button, AX 2012 will update financial dimension balances based on your posted financial dimensions transactions since the last time that you clicked the update balances button for the financial dimension set. For example, assume that you have a dimension set called department plus CC like we have here that had 10 transactions posted in January. On January 31st, you then click the update balances button. In February, there was only one transaction posted that involved dimensions for that dimension set. So if you click the update balances button, the financial dimension balances will only update it based on the transactions from February or the last time that you did the update. So these are some important buttons here. Now the last piece here is this concept of an update balances during the posting process option. So the update balances during the posting process option, when you mark that, you're essentially enable real-time financial dimension balance updates, as the code that runs when you click the update balances button will essentially run each time when a user posts if this option is selected. So at the financial dimension set level, you're essentially telling it whether or not you want balances to be updated during the posting processes. If you don't mark that checkbox, then you're saying that the update balances should be performed at a later point in time. So some strategy there that needs to be taken into consideration in regards to whether or not you want to select the update balances during the posting process option for your financial dimension sets that you've defined. So the key here with financial dimension sets in AX 2012 is that they're similar to the functionality of financial dimension focuses from AX 2009. The next thing that we'll talk about is Lesson 7, the ledger account alias in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. In this lesson, we'll talk about the concept of ledger account aliases and how they relate to financial dimensions in AX 2012. Ledger account aliases allow you to define a code for combinations of financial dimensions. So instead of manually selecting an individual dimension combination each time that you enter a transaction, you can select the ledger alias code. When you select the ledger account alias code, the combination of dimensions assigned to that alias will actually default into the account field. As an example, assume that you have an account structure that consists of main account, department, and cost center. On a daily basis, you enter a transaction related to the purchase of supplies from a vendor from your sales department, the 010 cost center, that debits a purchase ledger account called 110111. Without the use of ledger aliases, the entry of the financial dimension information in the account field during transaction entry would have required selecting the main account in the first segment, selecting the department in the second segment, and selecting the cost center in the third segment. Through the ledger account alias, I could actually create a ledger account alias called daily perch, which defaults that dimension combination into the account field during transaction entry. So let's take a look at how that functions in AX 2012. So I'll go to General Ledger, Setup, Chart of Accounts, Ledger Account Alias. In the ledger account alias form, I'm going to create a ledger account alias called daily perch. The key is how you name it. So you want to name it something that makes sense to the users that are actually entering the transactions. I'm going to map it to the account structure P&L, the CEU company. And this is where I'm actually defining the financial dimension combinations that I want to use for validation. So in this case, I'm going to say this, the 401100 account, the internal sales department, and the Contoso project cost center. Notice that when I selected OU1, I only see the OU 3566 because that account structure definition change that we made earlier on. Initial focus will be the account field. That is going to be at what time will it try to look for what we call the ledger account alias of daily perch. So that's an important component there. So to give you an idea of how that is going to work during transaction entry, I'm going to go to the general journal form and simply create a new journal. In the account field, I'm going to select daily. I'm going to enter just daily. And you can actually see that instead of me typing in the 401100 ledger account, OU1 department, OU 3566 cost center, I could simply just select DAI and it'll recognize that I have a ledger account alias out there. It actually defines or populates those dimension combinations for me. So the ledger account alias is used to group financial dimension combinations for ease of use during transaction entry. So without the concept of ledger account aliases, then I would have had to select the main account, the department, and the cost center separately in 3 different segments. But because I used a ledger account alias, I could simply type in the first few letters of the ledger account alias. The system goes out and looks for that ledger account alias. I select it and it pushes those remaining financial dimensions down for me based on how I define the ledger account alias. So pretty cool idea with the ledger account alias and really simplifying the transaction entry process. Moving on to lesson 8. So how to default accounts and financial dimension values in AX 2012. This lesson introduces how to default main accounts and financial dimension values in Dynamics AX 2012. So how to default financial dimension values in AX 2012. You would do this similarly to how you did this in AX 2009. The master records that you have set up in AX 2012 will have a dimensions tab. So your vendors, your items, your customers. So those master records in AX 2012 still have a dimensions tab, and the dimensions that you assign on the master record for those are actually going to default in during transaction entry, similarly to how we saw that from AX 2009. So if we look at this from a vendor standpoint, I'll go into AX, and I'll go to the vendors form, and for example, let's select the Alpine Electronics vendor, and there's going to be a financial dimensions pass tab. So if I wanted to default in a cost center, and a department for the Alpine Electronics vendor, I'd simply map it in the Financial Dimensions Fast tab of the vendor's form. So similarly to AX 2009, you're just mapping the financial dimensions to the vendor record. Now, in this example, I'm just using a vendor. The same concept would apply for defaulting dimensions for customers, for bank accounts, items, etc. So not a whole lot of difference here in AX 2012. So the next thing that we'll talk about in Lesson 9 is the segmented entry control in AX 2012. This lesson introduces how to use segmented entry control in AX 2012. So we've kind of already looked at this throughout the course here as far as the key differences here are in AX 2012, those financial dimension values you should really think of as a segment in your chart of accounts. In AX 2009, your financial dimensions were tracked in separate fields, so they really worked almost independently or outside of the ledger account. In AX 2012, with the concept of the account structure, we're essentially creating a segments in our chart of accounts for our financial dimensions that align to the main account. Segmented entry control just refers to how that occurs during transaction entry. Again, on page 47 and 48 of Lesson 9 in our training doc, we talk about there's a table there about how the transaction would be entered in 2009 versus how the transaction would be entered in AX 2012. So let's go into AX. First thing that we want to take a look at is setting up the segment delimiter. So this is, whether we want it to be a hyphen, a dot, a slash, or how do we want it, those segments or the financial dimension values to be separated from the main account during transaction entry in the account field. So I'm going to go to System Administration, Setup, System Parameters. In this case, I have defined a chart of accounts delimiter of a hyphen. So I'll see that throughout AX that the financial dimension values in my account structure that will be noticeable in the account field during transaction entry will be separated by a hyphen. So you're just setting up the segment delimiter here. That's all you're doing in the System Parameters form. So the next idea is this concept of a flyout display. So let's go actually into a general journal because it's probably easiest to see this flyout display in a general journal. So in this case, I have my general journal out there from earlier. I'm actually just going to go out and select an account here. I'll select the petty cash ledger account here. The segmented entry control actually has this flyout display where it says, okay, based on the main account that I selected, which is the petty cash account, then the department would be in the second segment, the cost center would be in the third segment, and the expense purpose financial dimension would be in the fourth segment. So once you've selected the main account, the system goes out and realizes which account structure this main account is mapped to, and then it realizes the segments that are assigned to that account structure and uses that in the flyout display so that the end user knows whether or which financial dimension values that they should select for that main account during transaction entry. So segmented entry control just has this flyout display, which really helps the transaction entry process be a little bit easier to manage. So how do we actually assign financial dimension values? So in this case, I'm just going to say let's select a department, a cost center, expense purpose. But let's say I have an offset account type here of Alpine Electronics. So how do I actually assign financial dimensions to my offset account? Or account types other than ledger? Well, you'll notice that at the top of our transaction form, so in this case the journal voucher form, there's a financial dimensions option now. So if I click financial dimensions and select offset account, you'll notice here that my cost center, my department, and my expense purpose will default into the offset account based on what I selected on the main account line of the journal voucher form. So if I wanted to select a different financial dimension value on the offset account of the journal, that I could simply go to the financial dimensions for and enter it here, and it'll assign these financial dimension values separately from the main account on the journal line. So the financial dimensions button at the top of our journal voucher form and the other forms in AX where you enter transactions will be relevant for account types other than ledger. So in this example, I just used the vendor offset account type. This would be the same thing for any other offset account type that you selected other than ledger. So you would simply use the financial dimensions button at the top of the journal voucher form to make that assignment of financial dimensions. Let's move on to lesson 10. Upgrade considerations for financial dimensions in Dynamics AX 2012. In this lesson, we'll talk about the upgrade considerations for financial dimensions in AX 2012. As we've discussed in the previous 9 lessons, the significant differences and changes related to financial dimensions between AX 2009 and AX 2012. So it's important that we take a look at the components of the upgrade process and how it relates to what you'll end up seeing in an AX 2012 scenario. The new financial dimension framework in AX 2012 is obviously a significant change in that we're moving away from the concepts of dimension sets and dimension set hierarchies to the concept of an account structure and everything being driven within the segments within the account structure. Now during the upgrade, there's going to be a pre-processing upgrade checklist. On the top of page 53 of the training doc provides a screenshot of the pre-processing upgrade checklist. Literally, you'll see an option called Prepare Financial Dimension Framework for Checklist. Prepare application data for pre-processing area of the pre-processing upgrade checklist form. So when you select the Prepare Financial Dimension Framework for Upgrade option from the pre-upgrade checklist form, the screenshot shown on page 54 is going to appear. So in the generated shared dimension focuses field of the Prepare Financial Dimension Framework for Upgrade form, you can select for each company account or select company account. So if you select for each company account, then the dimension focuses for each company account will upgrade as financial dimensions in AX 2012. If you select the company account, then you'll want to select the actual company account field. That field will be available when you select a company account. So you'd select the company account field, where you'd select the company where you want to have the actual dimension focuses upgrade as financial dimension sets in AX 2012. The idea being, remember, that the dimension focuses from AX 2009 will upgrade as dimension sets in AX 2012. Also in the Prepare Financial Dimension Framework for Upgrade form, there are 2 buttons on the top right of the form. Again, page 54 of the training doc provides a screenshot of what that form will look like. The buttons at the top right of the form that will allow you to see the ledger account categories and dimension focus upgrade validation components. So when you click those buttons, you'll be able to define the ledger account categories upgrade validation and the dimension focus upgrade validation. So when you select the ledger account categories upgrade validation, you can fix any conflicts that the checklist may have found with ledger account categories. For example, assume that you have a ledger account category called cash from AX 2009 that you selected to upgrade to a C01 company account. However, the cash ledger account also exists in AX 2009 in 3 other companies, and the cash ledger account category is set up differently in each of those 3 other companies. So in the ledger account category upgrade forms, you can select which company to base that cash ledger account category from during the upgrade so that we know how that main account category should be created, from which company do we want to look at it from a perspective of 2009 to determine how we want to push it into AX 2012. Again, the figure on page 55 of the ledger account category upgrade errors form gives you an idea of what that will look like during the upgrade. The second component is the dimension focus upgrade validation. So back on the Prepare Financial Dimension Framework for Upgrade form, you're going to see that dimension focus upgrade validation button. When you click that button, you'd be fixing any conflicts that the checklist may have found with the dimension focuses. For example, assume that you have a focus called ACC and you selected the CO1 company account. However, the ACC dimension focus also exists in 3 other companies in AX 2009. So what you're selecting in the dimension focus upgrade validation form is you're selecting which company from AX 2009 you want to create that dimension focus as a dimension set in AX 2012. So you're just determining which company's dimension focus do you want to look at it to push that forward as a dimension set into AX 2012 during the upgrade. So there's some important setup components there. And the dimension focus upgrade errors form on the top of page 56 gives you an idea of what that form is going to look like when you're doing this during the pre-processing upgrade checklist. So lesson 11, now that we're familiar with the financial dimension changes in AX 2012, let's step back and walk through what we covered in lessons 1 through 10 and just kind of give a recap of what we know about financial dimensions in AX 2012 and how that differs from the financial dimension framework from what we're used to in AX 2009. So some key areas, the framework for financial dimensions is obviously significantly changed in AX 2012 to align mainly with the changes for the organizational model. So our financial dimension framework is really more closely aligned with our org model framework in AX 2012. Some key points here. In AX 2012, you have the ability to create both user-defined dimensions and system-defined dimensions, whereas in AX 2009, you could only create user-defined dimensions. So examples of system-defined dimensions, meaning you could create a system-defined dimension off of your customers, your vendors, your items, your projects, your assets, and so forth. When you set that up as a system-defined dimension, then the actual assets, vendors, customers, items, projects will be available for selection to map to your account structure. And you don't actually have to create those as financial dimension values because it will interpret those from your master records. In AX 2012, the account structure is replacing what was accomplished through dimension sets, dimension set hierarchies, and dimension set rules to enforce the validation. So we're replacing those concepts with the account structure. So everything is kind of driven through that account structure and the advanced rules that you create off of that account structure. In AX 2012, you can also use main account templates to create your new main account. So you don't have to create main accounts off of a main account template, but you can certainly utilize main account templates to make the process more efficient for the addition of main accounts and for managing your chart of accounts. Financial dimension sets in AX 2012 are different than the concept of dimension sets from AX 2009. The key difference being financial dimension sets in AX 2012 are really similar to dimension focuses from AX 2009. And remember, on the financial dimension sets, there's a couple of buttons about updating the balances for that dimension set, initializing the balances, and whether or not you want to control those updates to happen during the posting logic itself for the dimension sets. Also in AX 2012, we have the ability to use ledger account aliases, which we saw could default in a combination of financial dimension values during transaction entry to really make the transaction entry process even more efficient. The defaulting of main accounts and financial dimensions we saw is quite similar between AX 2009 and AX 2012 off of your vendors, your customers, your items. We still have that financial dimensions fast tab where you can default those in, which will come into play during transaction entry, similar to what you're used to. And of course, to accommodate the framework for the financial dimensions in AX 2012, we have segmented entry control now. So segmented entry control really relates to the account field, allowing us to not only specify the ledger account, which we're now calling main account in AX 2012, but also plugging in the financial dimensions into that same account field. And based on the main account that you select in the account field, we saw that flyout display would tell us what other segment financial dimension values we'd have the ability to select based on which account structure that main account is mapped to. So some key differences there in financial dimensions in the AX 2012.
Lesson 12 provides an overview of distributions and subledger journal entries in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. In previous versions of Microsoft Dynamics AX, during the entry of a transaction and prior to it being posted, users had very limited visibility into the full accounting entries that were to be posted to the general ledger. This increased the likelihood of inaccurate or unexpected ledger accounts being used during posting, and in turn could create a need for several correcting transactions. On certain source documents, Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 introduces the capability for users to preview the accounting entry that will take place prior to actually posting the transaction. This will improve the accuracy of transactions and increase productivity by reducing the number of necessary corrections during month-end, year-end, or period-end. The ability to preview the transaction is provided on the Subledger Journals form. Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 also provides users with the capability to edit the accounting of source documents prior to posting so that amounts may be split between multiple ledger accounts if necessary. The ability to edit and split amounts of a source document is found on the Accounting Distributions form. Accounting Distributions and Subledger Journal Entries functionality is available on the following source documents: purchase order, product receipt, which was previously known as purchase order package slip, vendor invoice, purchase requisition, free text invoice, travel requisition, and expense transaction. These source documents are part of the foundation for an accounting framework within Microsoft Dynamics AX that will provide consistency and eventually utilize accounting distributions and subledger journal entries on all transactions. In addition to providing the ability to split amounts on a transaction and preview the accounting entry for accuracy, the accounting distribution and subledger journal entry functionality also provides the following: separation of operations and accounting. The use of accounting distributions and subledger journal entries allow for some separation of operations and accounting. Distributions are geared for users who do not necessarily need to know the entire debit and credit entry for the transaction. They may be more concerned with ensuring that a particular dimension is used properly, whereas subledger journal entry forms are intended for those personas that understand and may need to validate or approve the transaction. Enhanced audit trail. Functionality has also been added into some of the source documents for corrections. As a result, the audit trail has been enhanced for proper traceability with this feature through the use of accounting events. Accounting events provide a distinction for identifying what was the original entry, the correcting entries, or cancellation of entries. The visibility into the accounting entries through the use of distributions and subledger journal entries is also the foundation for 3 additional primary features in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. The following features utilize this functionality. Budget control. This is a process that monitors the budget and provides validation about the availability of funds during the entry of transactions. The validation compares the budgets that are defined for the ledger accounts and the amounts on the project distributions. In addition to using accounting distributions to split amounts across ledger accounts, amounts can be split across multiple projects. Finally, posting and summarization. Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 offers users the flexibility to postpone the transfer of subledger journal entries to the ledger. The purpose of this functionality is to provide options for those users who may be concerned about performance issues, and also provide the ability to summarize transactions in the general ledger. The 3 options available for posting are Synchronous, which posts the transactions from the source document to the general ledger immediately. And this is how posting is currently handled in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. Batch, which is the default setting. Users will also have the ability to send the transactions to a batch and post them to the general ledger periodically. Posting through the use of a batch does provide the ability to summarize transactions. And finally, asynchronous posting. Asynchronous posting will effectively put the journalized transaction on hold and will transfer transactions to the general ledger when there are free resources available on the server. Summarization is not available when using synchronous posting. Now let's talk a little bit about the accounting distributions framework and the subledger journal entries framework. The following principles apply to the accounting distributions framework in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. All amounts must have an accounting distribution. For all source documents that use accounting distributions, every individual amount on the source document must have one or more accounting distribution. This includes amounts such as the primary line amount, but also taxes, discounts, and miscellaneous charges. Splitting accounting distributions. The accounting distributions form allows users to indirectly edit the subledger journals by editing and/or splitting the distributions. The total of the distribution splits must equal the original amount that was split. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, there are limitations on splitting. For example, only items that are considered to be not stocked have the capability to be split. Stocked items do not have the ability to be split at this time. Determine subledger journal entry. Accounting distributions serve as the gateway to the subledger journal entry. That is, when the actual accounting entry is created for the subledger journal, it is derived from the accounting distributions. Transaction currency. The amount on the accounting distributions is always displayed in the transaction currency. The accounting distribution form will not display accounting currency or reporting currency. Define legal entity. The accounting distribution framework supports splitting across legal entities on the line level. However, this functionality is currently only available for the expense transaction source document in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. Validation. The validation of the ledger account on accounting distributions, including the natural account and dimension values combination, is based on dimension trees and rules. The account number field utilizes the new account number control feature, which will simplify the entry of dimensions on the distributions form. This will allow the user to filter dimensions to only those that are relevant to the defaulted natural account. In addition, the user still has control over the editability of the natural account through settings on the account. Subledger journal entries framework. The following principles apply to the use of Subledger journal entries in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. As with any accounting entry, debits must equal credits on the Subledger journal entry for all currencies. The Subledger journal entry itself is not editable. Any changes to the Subledger journal entry would have to be made either on the accounting distributions form, or if the offset account is incorrect, changes would need to be made on the posting profile, for example. Summarized. The Subledger journal entry will be summarized within the source document. Drillback capability exists for the transactions that have been posted into the general ledger. Starting from the general ledger voucher, you can drill down to the subledgers associated with the source document. Relief of upstream accounting. Subledger journal entries fully supports the relief of upstream source document subledger entries. As an example, take the case of a product receipt that has recorded an accrued liability for an item. At the time of processing the vendor invoice for the product receipt, the upstream accounting transactions for the product receipt will be fully reversed and a new transaction recorded for the vendor invoice. Finally, intercompany accounting. The Subledger journal entries framework does support the intercompany accounting necessary for transactions that are split across multiple legal entities. The Subledger journal entries framework will create the appropriate due to and due from transactions. However, this functionality is only currently available for the expense transaction source document. Lesson 13 discusses the general setup and use of accounting distributions and Subledger journal entries in the purchase order process. The procurement and sourcing and accounts payable modules of Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 utilize the accounting distributions and Subledger journal entry functionality on the purchase order, product receipt, vendor invoice, and purchase requisition forms. The following information provides a brief description on how to utilize the features on these forms. For more information regarding the purchase order process, please refer to the new features course for supply chain management. One very important distinction to make regarding the purchase order process is that the ability to split and edit accounting distributions is not available for inventory items that are considered to be stock items. For these stocked items, the accounting distributions form will be present in the same manner it is for not stocked items. However, the ability to split the distributions is only available for items that are not stocked. Let's step through the purchase order process and take a look at how these accounting distribution forms and Subledger journal entry forms are utilized. To create a purchase order and view the accounting distributions, go to Accounts Payable in the Common area, expand Purchase Orders, and select All Purchase Orders. In the Purchase Orders list page, in the New area on the Action pane, click Purchase Order to create a new purchase order. Select a vendor account and click OK. In the Purchase Order Lines area, select a non-stock item for the purchase order. Enter a quantity and unit price, and the net amount will calculate. On the Action pane strip of the Purchase Order Lines, select the Financials drop-down and select Distribute Amounts. This will open the Accounting Distributions form. The Accounting Distributions form is comprised of two areas. The Purchase Order Amounts area on the left-hand side provides a tree view of the specific purchase order line. It will display the line number, a description of the line, and the amounts associated with the line, including sales tax, discounts, and miscellaneous charges if they're applicable. On the right-hand side, the detail of any split or breakdown regarding the purchase order line is displayed. We can select to distribute the lines by percent, amount, or quantity. We'll select percent for this purchase order and click split. You'll see the accounting distributions creates a new line. From there, we can enter our ledger account information using the dimension entry control feature. We can also enter a percent for this line item. Proceed to the next line, and again, use our dimension entry control feature. To provide a further breakdown of the dimensions for this line. Enter our remaining percent amount, and our accounting distributions form is complete. You'll notice we can also select to distribute the lines equally, or we can reset to the original accounting distributions if we need to start over. Now we can close the form. Back on the purchase order, if we select the Purchase tab from the action pane strip, we can now confirm our purchase order. Our purchase order has been confirmed. If we were choosing to encumber purchase orders, we would have an option available in the accounting area called View Ledger Distributions. However, since we are not choosing to encumber purchase orders at this point, no transactions have been created. To proceed to the product receipt posting, click on the Receive area of the action pane strip. The product receipt posting process, which was formerly known as the packing slip, does not provide visibility into the accounting distribution. This is because at the time of posting the receipt, there is little need to edit or change the accounting distributions, since only the receipt of goods is taking place. The need to edit accounting distributions will be more likely during the creation of the purchase order and at the time of vendor invoicing. There is also no option to view the Subledger journal entries prior to posting the product receipt. The capability to view the Subledger journal entries after posting the product receipt does exist if the product receipt is set up to accrue a liability at the time of receiving, since general ledger transactions will occur. After a purchase order has been confirmed, the product receipt can be posted. To post the product receipt, click on Product Receipt in the Generate area. Enter a number for the product receipt and click OK to post. If you are choosing to accrue the liability at the time of product receipt, you can view the Subledger journal entries after posting the product receipt. In the Journals area, simply select Product Receipt. From there, select Subledger journal entries to view the transaction. You can close the form and proceed to vendor invoicing. To begin the vendor invoice process, select the Invoice tab on the action pane strip and select Invoice in the Generate area. The vendor invoice form will open. From within the vendor invoice form, the accounting distributions can be viewed in the Lines area by selecting the Financials dropdown and clicking Distribute Amounts. The accounting distributions that have been created in previous steps procurement process have been carried forward to the vendor invoice. These accounting distributions may be corrected on the vendor invoice form, and it may be necessary to do so if a review of the distributions find them to be in error or incomplete. Even though the distributions can change at the time of vendor invoice, Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 will maintain the reference to the upstream accounting, which would be product receipt entries, for example, in order to properly reverse or relieve those entries. In order to maintain those references, the ability to delete distribution lines does not exist on the accounting distributions form on the vendor invoice. If the accounting distributions look correct, you can close the accounting distributions form. To preview Subledger journal entries that will take place when the invoice is posted, go to the Financials tab on the action pane strip and select Subledger Journal in the accounting area. The transactions that will take place are available for preview from the Subledger Journal form. If those look correct, you can close the form, enter an invoice number, and back on the vendor invoice tab, select Post to post the vendor invoice. Once the invoice has been posted, if necessary, you can use the invoice icon in the journals area to once again view Subledger journal entries. These are the posted transactions as a result of posting the vendor invoice. You can close the form and the process is complete. As mentioned previously, depending upon an organization's needs, the purchase order can be used to post to the ledger through the use of commitment accounting and encumbrances. Encumbrances are widely used by public sector organizations. Generally speaking, most private organizations will not use commitment accounting and encumbrances. So in those instances, the purchase order will not be set up to post to the ledger. If an organization, however, does decide to use commitment accounting with encumbrances, the Subledger journal entries form on the purchase order will be populated and available to view. To enable encumbrance accounting for purchase orders to post to the ledger, go to General Ledger, Setup, General Ledger Parameters, expand the Accounting Rules Fast tab, and with the Use Posting Definition checkbox marked, enable commitment accounting by checking the Enable Encumbrance Process checkbox. Finally, in the same way that purchase orders can be posted to the ledger through the use of encumbrance accounting, purchase requisitions can also be posted through the ledger through the use of pre-encumbrances and commitment accounting. If an organization decides to use commitment accounting with pre-encumbrances, the Subledger journal entries form on the purchase requisition will be populated and available to view. To enable pre-encumbrance accounting for purchase requisitions to post to the ledger, again, go to General Ledger, Setup, Ledger Parameters, expand the Accounting Rules Fast tab, with the Use Posting Definitions checkbox marked to enable commitment accounting, mark the Enable Pre-Encumbrance Process checkbox to allow posting for pre-encumbrances. Lesson 14 provides a brief overview on how accounting distributions and Subledger journal entries will appear when used on other forms such as free text invoices, travel requisitions, and expense transactions. When used on the free text invoice, the accounting distributions form will look something similar to this, where each line is broken down by its price and the split based on either the amount, percent, or quantity, and its associated ledger account is shown. The Subledger journal entries form will provide a preview of the actual accounting entry, which shows the accounting distributions and their offsetting ledger accounts and amounts. Let's look at a demonstration on how these forms work on the free text invoice from within Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. In the Accounts Receivable module, go to the Common area and select Free Text Invoices. From there, select All Free Text Invoices. Create a new free text invoice and select the customer account. In the Lines area of the free text invoice, enter a description and a main account to be used. Enter a sales tax group and an item sales tax group if applicable, and also enter a unit price. From there, select Distribute Amounts. That will open the Accounting Distributions form. On the Accounting Distributions form, in the Distributed By drop-down, we can select how to distribute our line amounts, by percent, amount, or quantity. If we select amount, we click Split, and that will add a new line to our accounting distributions. We can then enter the amount to split, or we can also select Distribute Equally. After distributing the proper amounts, we can then select the ledger account and dimensions that we want to split the amounts to. Once we've decided on a ledger account split and our amounts, we can close the form and return to the free text invoice. From there, we can select Subledger Journal to preview the accounting entries associated with our split. You'll see the ledger account and its dimensions for each line and the associated offsetting ledger accounts to be posted. We can close that form if it looks good, and then go ahead and post our free text invoice. And that is how accounting distributions and subledger journal entries appear on free text invoices. The accounting distributions forms can also be accessed for travel expense and travel requisitions from within Enterprise Portal, so expenses can be split appropriately. You'll notice the form shown here differs slightly than the one that you will see within the client. However, there are still the same options to split by percent, amount, or quantity and distribute equally, and there is also an area for dimensions and ledger account to split appropriately. For both the travel expense and travel requisition forms, subledger journals will be available to be viewed from within the client when approving the travel transactions. Lesson 15 further discusses the use of asynchronous and batch posting for subledger journal entries. Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 introduces the concept of asynchronous posting. Asynchronous posting will effectively put journalized transactions on hold in the subledger and will transfer transactions to the general ledger when there are free resources available on the server. This will improve the overall performance of Microsoft Dynamics AX by more effectively utilizing system resources. Whether choosing to use asynchronous posting, synchronous posting, or batch posting, there are some considerations to be aware of to make Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 work best in your situation. To specify how you will process transfers from the subledger to the general ledger, use the general ledger parameters form. From within Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, go to the General Ledger module in the Setup area and click on General Ledger Parameters. In the General Ledger Parameters form, select Batch Transfer Rules. You will notice the default transfer mode for all source document types listed initially. However, you can also add lines and specify which source document type to use and what transfer mode will be used for that source document type. You can also select to summarize the accounting entries and a notification group to alert when the transfer has taken place. The use of batch processing provides the ability to summarize transactions across source documents when transferring them to the general ledger. If the following properties within the subledger journal entry are the same, they can be summarized: ledger, source document type, accounting date, currency code, posting type, and ledger account. Summarization through batch processing will not cause a loss of details regarding these properties, as that information will still exist in the subledger. Validation of the components of the entry, such as ledger account, exchange rates, accounting date within an open period, or debits equaling credits, will also take place when the subledger is journalized. The validation does not reoccur when transferring to the general ledger. Also, the accounting date of the transaction that is on the subledger will be the accounting date that is transferred to the general ledger, even if it is at a later date. Based on the above, for example, there is a possibility that an account structure that was valid when the subledger journal was created will not be valid when the transaction is actually transferred to the general ledger. Since the accounting date is transferred to the general ledger and the accounting structures have date effectivity in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, this ensures that no matter when the transaction is transferred to the general ledger, there was a valid account structure in place at the time of the accounting date. Subledger reconciliations. With asynchronous and batch processing comes the possibility that at any given time, a subledger may not tie out to its control account in the general ledger. Due to this potential mismatch, accounting professionals may want to reconsider their reconciliation process in regard to these types of control accounts. Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 does provide some safeguards regarding control accounts on subledgers at the time of posting. For example, Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 will not allow a period to be closed if unfinished or asynchronous postings exist that have an accounting date within that period and have not yet been transferred to the general ledger. Periods are allowed to be placed on hold if unfinished postings exist, but they cannot be closed. It is up to each organization to determine what business process to implement regarding reconciliations, but it is necessary to highlight this change in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 so users can make the decision that is right for them.
Partner Technical Services is a benefit provided to members in the Microsoft Partner Network to ensure success throughout the business cycle. Partner Technical Services include services, offerings with packaged and custom solutions that can help increase revenue, accelerate the sales cycle, win more deals, beat competitors, expand a skill set, provide more reliable deployments, and increase customer satisfaction. Partner Technical Services technical consultants have the latest product, technical sales, and delivery expertise, and are committed to partner enablement via knowledge transfer. Through delivery of effective guidance, our consultants share best practices, empowering partners to continually deliver high-quality engagements to customers. When you enroll, re-enroll, or qualify for an upgrade, you will receive partner advisory hours allocated to your organization based on membership competency level. Until you enroll or re-enroll under the new structure, your existing benefit structure will continue. Partner advisory hours provide a single currency to use in obtaining partner technical services packaged and custom solutions. Your current allocation of advisory hours can be used to take advantage of the new offerings under partner technical services. You will only see a change to your advisory hour benefits when you enroll or re-enroll after October 2010. Optimize your business by gaining knowledge and increasing your capacity to successfully provide services to customers. Our offerings help your organization broaden your readiness and enhance your methodologies to further your reach in the marketplace. Accelerate the sales cycle, increase wins against the competition, and expand your business with partner technical services. With service offerings from PTS, you'll be able to proficiently convey the functionalities, value propositions, and key benefits of Microsoft products and solutions. Our best practices and guidance will help grow your market share. Ensure IT services are deployed effectively and successfully with a more reliable result. Sharing our best practices, PTS empowers you to perform operative deployments with minimal risk. If you have additional questions and wish to utilize your partner advisory hours for assistance, contact AskPTS@Microsoft.com or call 1-800-MPN-SOLVE.